Hi everybody, this is Miss Martha. We're going to go over some participle phrases and how to use them in our writing to make our writing more fluid, to make it more interesting to the reader, and to give the reader a little bit more information about what you're writing. So first of all, hopefully by now you know what a participle phrase is. If not, let's just do a little quick review. And a participle phrase is a phrase that can be at the beginning, it can be in the middle, it can be at the end of the sentence. It is not a complete sentence by itself, but rather it's a verb phrase that modifies a subject. So for example, let's look at these sentences with participle phrases. This very first one says, eating the ripe apple, Lisa pursed her lips and shivered at the sour taste. In that sentence, the participle phrase is eating the ripe apple. And one of the ways that you can tell is that there is a verb with ing, so that's a big clue. Now, it doesn't always have to be a verb with ing. And anytime you see a verb with an ing, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a participle phrase. But if you look for a phrase that's set apart by commas and it has an ing verb in it, and that phrase cannot be a sentence by itself, that's a pretty good clue that that is a participle phrase. So for example, eating the ripe apple, that could not be a sentence by itself, right? Rather, it is a phrase that modifies what Lisa is doing. It tells us more about Lisa. It gives us more of an insight into what Lisa is doing. So let's look at the next one. Running to catch the dog, Brian tripped on his shoelaces. Running to catch the dog is the participle phrase, and a clue is that it's got commas that is setting it apart from the rest of the sentence, and that phrase cannot be a sentence by itself. Because if you said running to catch the dog, right, that is not a complete sentence by itself. Rather, it is telling us more about what's going on with Brian. Staring blankly at his test, AJ remembered nothing. Okay, what's the participle phrase in there? Staring blankly at his test, right? It's giving us more information about what's going on with AJ. It's also not a complete sentence by itself. Staring blankly at his test. It also has a verb with ing. So those are some of the clues that tell you that, hey, this might be a participle phrase. And so why do we use participle phrases? Well, we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do, I want us to also look at what would happen if we did not include participle phrases in those previous sentences. What would we be missing? So let's look at that first sentence again without the participle phrase. We would simply see Lisa pursed her lips and shivered at the sour taste. We're missing information there. We don't know why she's doing that. What is she eating? Or is she eating something? Is it a sour taste in her mouth because someone just told her bad news? Without that participle phrase, we would not know that indeed she is eating a ripe apple. That next sentence without the participle phrase would read as follows. Brian tripped on his shoelaces. Well, we might think that maybe Brian is just really clumsy because we have no information as to what's going on. Why did he trip on his shoelaces? Well, with that participle phrase, we learn that he is running to catch the dog. And that last sentence, AJ remembered nothing. Wow, without the participle phrase, we are really left in the dark as to why AJ remembered nothing or what's going on. But with that participle phrase, we learn that he was staring blankly at his test, which, I don't know, may be a feeling that you guys can relate to sometimes. But he remembered nothing. So participle phrases are really important in modifying what's going on with our subject of the sentence. They're very important. But you may think, okay, well, I could just separate these into two sentences. Why do I need to even use a participle phrase? I'll tell you why. It gives us much more of a fluid writing. In other words, which one sounds better? Let's look at these two examples. One is separated into two sentences, and then one has the same exact thoughts, except it uses participle phrases. So, Lisa ate, sorry for that typo, Lisa ate the ripe apple. In fact, I think I can fix that, yeah. Lisa ate the ripe apple. She pursed her lips and shivered at the sour taste. Or, eating the ripe apple, Lisa pursed her lips and shivered at the sour taste. Which one sounds more fluid? Which one sounds more sophisticated in its writing style? I think, and I think most people would agree, the one with the participle phrase sounds more fluid. Let's look at these. Which one sounds more fluid? Which one sounds better? Running to catch the dog, Brian tripped on his shoelaces. Or, Brian ran to catch the dog. He tripped on his shoelaces. One of them sounds more like a second grader would write it. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's just not a sophisticated writing style. And lastly, AJ stared blankly at his test. He remembered nothing. Or, staring blankly at his test, AJ remembered nothing. Again, there's nothing wrong with the first one, and you might use it for effect. But in general, using a participle phrase is really going to up your writing style. So I want us to practice. Here's a practice, 2 sentences that you could practice combining. Inez rode her bicycle to the store. She was pedaling furiously. So if you look on the left where it says do this, you can see how we can turn part of this information into a participle phrase and make it a complete sentence. Pedaling furiously, Inez rode her bicycle to the store. So do that to turn it into a participle phrase. However, do not do this. On the right-hand side where it says not that, this is combining the 2 thoughts into one sentence, but it's merely making them a compound sentence by keeping 2 complete thoughts and combining them together with a conjunction. Inez rode her bicycle to the store and she was pedaling furiously. See how those 2 thoughts are still contained? Each one of those could still be a complete sentence by itself. That means you're not making it into a participle phrase. Remember, a participle phrase cannot be a complete sentence by itself. Like, let's look back to the do this example, pedaling furiously. That cannot be a complete sentence by itself. However, if done incorrectly and you're just joining them together with a compound word, or rather with a conjunction, they're still two complete sentences together. So let's practice. I want you to look at these, and you can pause the video as you write down how you would write this sentence turn it into one sentence, make a participle phrase, and make it sound more fluid. So practice number 1, I reached into the water, I grabbed the fish by the tail. How can you turn that into one sentence and use a participle phrase? Pause that and go ahead and write that down. All right, practice number 2, do the same thing. I looked into my mother's eyes, I told her a big lie. How can you make this into one sentence and use a participle phrase in your writing? Pause that while you do that. And practice number 3, my hand began to hurt. I stirred the pasta sauce quickly. So how can you combine these 2 sentences using a participle phrase and make it sound more fluid? Pause this while you write it down. All right, let's look and see what you got. Did you get this answer? And maybe there might be more than one answer for each one of these to combine them, but these are the ones that I came up with that sound the most fluid to my ear. So turning, I reached into the water, I grabbed the fish by the tail, into one sentence using a participle phrase, I came up with reaching into the water, that's the participle phrase, that cannot be a sentence by itself. Reaching into the water, I grabbed the fish by the tail. Practice number 2, I looked into my mother's eyes, I told her a big lie. All right, did you get this? Looking into my mother's eyes, I told her a big lie. All right, remember, looking into my mother's eyes, that's the participle phrase. It cannot be a sentence by itself, and it modifies what's going on. It modifies I. What am I doing? Did you get this one for practice number 3? The original 2 sentences were, my hand began to hurt. I stirred the pasta sauce quickly. Did you get stirring the pasta sauce quickly? My hand began to hurt. All right, hopefully by now you can see the utility in combining 2 sentences and taking one sentence that might be awkward or just choppy and turning it into a participle phrase. So as you go on in your writing careers, as you're writing papers, essays, any writing responses, if you think about, is this a sentence that I really need to make? Is this giving me enough information in one sentence? Or can I perhaps turn this into a participle phrase to vary my sentence structure, or to give my reader more information, or just to make it sound less choppy? I want you to think about that as you write from now on. Hopefully this was helpful, and I will talk to you guys soon.